In the studio to talk about this some more is TalkTV's royal editor Sarah Hewson. She's still with me. And for more on the political and constitutional aspects of this news, we're joined by constitutional historian Daniel Britton and the Sun's chief political correspondent Jack Elson. The three of you, thank you very much indeed. And Sarah, just briefly, when I'm listening to Lindsay Hall, the Speaker of the House of Commons, talking about this and the gravity of the tone, it's taking me back to the passing of the late Queen. I'm not making a linkage there, but I'm just sort of saying this country has been through a lot of royal news in the last years.
Of course, it just shows us that link between the monarch and Parliament, because, of course, when on the day of the late Queen's death, that note was passed to Liz Truss in the House of Commons. And today, with the diagnosis of the King, the Prime Minister was informed before the public. So there are protocols to go through. But significantly, we're told by Buckingham Palace that the Prime Minister's meetings, the weekly audience that takes place with the King, is to carry on. And that's a very important part of the diary. That is due to be carrying on in person, potentially, but at some point, if it's decided that that shouldn't happen in person because the King should reduce his in-person contact, for example, to protect his immune system, then they will find other ways of doing it.
Let's bring you this breaking news that the US President Joe Biden says he is concerned about the King's cancer diagnosis and plans to call him later. Quote, "I am concerned about him," the US President said when asked about the matter during a visit to Las Vegas, speaking to reporters just a few minutes ago. Coming into the studio then, and we will get back to the politics with Jack, but Daniel, I'd like to come to you first as a constitutional expert and ask you, what were your first thoughts on hearing this news today?
Oh, sadness, of course, and shock at that news. And yet also impressed, and you've talked about this, that they were so open about it. And it says in the statement that the news has been released to make it better known around the world and, you know, to feel for those all around the world who, of course, get cancer. Any cancer diagnosis is always a terrible shock.
Now, constitutionally, what raises some, not concerns, but what factors do you think are going to be at play here with all the various councils and things that kick into action when there is a state of emergency with the royal family?
Well, you were mentioning the audience, and that normally takes place on a Tuesday evening, actually, and so that would be due to take place with the Prime Minister tomorrow evening. The most frequent meetings that the King would attend would be the meetings of the Privy Council, attended by cabinet ministers, normally 4 or 5 cabinet ministers, where formal business of government is done, but needs the King's approval. That is very much an in-person meeting. No one sits down. It's very brief, and not sitting down keeps it brief. But it requires the King to say approve at the end of every Privy Council order, and that's held roughly once a month, more when necessary. So that's a very important bit, not filmed. As part of Parliament, there is the signing of Acts of Parliament. Further down the path, it may be necessary to have councillors of state who take the role of the head of state, the sovereign, if they need to. And actually, one of the very first things that happened after the King became king was the Councillors of State Act, which appointed new ones, largely, it's thought, to replace Prince Harry and the Duke of York. So the Earl of Essex, Princess Anne and Queen Camilla herself are all councillors of state who can act when there are 2 of them together on behalf of the King. It gets complicated when there is a general election.
Why is that?
Because the necessary acts around an election are within the personal prerogative of the sovereign. The agreement to a dissolution of the old Parliament and the calling of a new one is still the personal prerogative of the King. That doesn't mean he's going to do something completely wayward. It'd be very unlikely. However, it is necessary for the King to approve that, and under the terms of the acts which govern councillorship of state, that cannot be done by the Council of State. It has to be done by the sovereign. I remember, because I'm very, very old, in February 1974, the Queen was in Australia when Ted Heath called an election. Yes, February 74. And that came as a big surprise. And the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret were not allowed to grant the dissolution. They had to phone up the Queen in Australia, say, is it OK? She said yes, dissolution was granted. We had a general election.
Now, I mentioned the general election because, of course, we're in election year. Jack Elson joins me in the studio as well from The Sun. And, you know, there's been a fair bit of political statements about this. Jack, we were just hearing, of course, that the audience with the Prime Minister will continue. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak might be a bit relieved, some could say, that the spotlight is off him somewhat this evening, even if the news is pretty serious about this. But we have had a statement from Sunak, of course, that he wishes the King well.
Yes, of course. And in Westminster, they fight about everything. There's divisions about every single issue, although, you know, including the future of the royal family. But obviously, one man's health issue is always going to unite the parties, and obviously led by the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, saying that obviously he hopes the King is going to make a full recovery soon and will be back to work. Keir Starmer, the leader of the SNP, and actually quite crucially, the new First Minister of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill, saying today how she hopes that the King will make a speedy recovery. Obviously, not known to love the monarchy either in the SNP or in Sinn Féin. In terms of Rishi Sunak and overshadowing anything he's done today, he's obviously spent the day in Northern Ireland, marking that return to power sharing from the executive after almost 2 years paralysed. Now, he hasn't had many wins at the moment to celebrate and to trumpet, and so obviously I think he was hoping to get a bit of a victory lap by flying over there today. However, he also had a very testing interview with TalkTV's Piers Morgan, which was due to air tonight, and we saw that on the YouTube channel earlier. Obviously, he was very keen to stress that he's made progress on a lot of priorities, although has come unstuck under challenge by Piers quite a lot, and especially some of the reaction to taking that £1,000 bet to the flights for Rwanda. And so I think that, you know, he won't be feeling any upset that this has been overshadowed at all. You know, he's a human being at the end of the day. Although, you know, I think that the work of government is going to continue, obviously.
It obviously will. And look, the full interview between Piers Morgan and Rishi Sunak is still available on the YouTube channel, will continue to be, and will be aired at 11 p.m. this evening. Piers Morgan is up next. He's going to continue the coverage of the breaking news regarding King Charles. And just finally, Jack, I want to talk to you about the statement that we have from US President Joe Biden, that he is obviously concerned by the news and that he's going to pick up the phone, he says, and give Charles a call. What did you make of that?
Yes, I mean, I think it just goes to show how well-respected our royal family is across the world and how far-reaching the ramifications of this news we've had tonight. You know, President Joe Biden, probably the most important man in the world, and the fact that he's going to take time out of his busy schedule in an election year as well for the US to call the UK's monarch, I think, probably goes to show how important a role he has, not just in Britain, but around the world as well.
And Daniel, I can see you nodding along there. Well, I can let you know that former US President Donald Trump, has also released a statement within just the last few minutes calling King Charles III a wonderful man. And as we often see in big occasions like this, everyone's kind of stepping over themselves to deliver a statement.
Well, quite interesting, because what is due to take place later in the year, I think, is a state visit by the President of South Korea.
Yes, and we were expecting over the course of the next year this to be a big global push by members of the royal family to get out, because obviously in the COVID years and then with the death of the Queen and then the focus being on the coronation, we haven't actually had a lot of overseas travel. The King was also due to be travelling to Australia.
That's in what, October time?
Yes, yes. Yeah. We were due to be having the Prince and Princess of Wales travelling to Rome, for example. We don't know what the long-term picture is. There were no announced state visits by Buckingham Palace, they say. None that had been confirmed publicly that have got to be.
Had been
but they said obviously his engagements are going to have to be postponed. There will be other members of the royal family picking up some of those engagements, but others will be delayed until the King is ready to return.
And on the subject of Northern Ireland, I think the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, she did actually go to the Queen's funeral and the coronation of the King.
She did.
So, you know, things are changing in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. You can't just take one rule and apply it to them all.
We've had the career state visit, of course, the incoming state visit. Yes.
This is what happens with constitutional and royal experts all on the same panel in the studio. Look, we have so much knowledge with us this evening. We are blessed. Daniel Britton, Jack Elson and Sarah Hewson, thank you very much.